Hello, this is Chris Ferrara for Fatima Perspectives, a series of commentaries on church affairs from the perspective of the message of Fatima. What is this perspective of the message of Fatima that is thematic to this show? Well, we need to consider in that regard the third secret of Fatima in particular. And furthermore, Sister Lucia's reference to that third secret by the phrase diabolical disorientation in the church. Again and again she referred to diabolical disorientation at the level of the upper hierarchy. More and more Catholics are now seeing with their own two eyes that diabolical disorientation. In a synod process, for example, where now we're being told to pray for the synod as if the synod was some sort of threat to the church that we have to avert by our prayers, when any gathering of Catholic prelates should be a guarantee of Catholic orthodoxy. Today, however, it's a potential threat to the church. And we've seen that in the Synod's midterm report, calling essentially for the dismantling of the church's bimillennial discipline, respecting the impossibility of admitting divorced and remarried Catholics to Holy Communion, a discipline that John Paul II and Pope Benedict XVI insisted on maintaining despite attempts to overthrow it. Well, now the attempt to overthrow it is in fifth gear with the synodal process. And another aspect that I'd like to talk about today of this diabolic disorientation is what I would call the reign of double talk in the church. Nonsensical pronouncements, saying one thing but actually meaning another. And this has become pervasive in the church since the Second Vatican Council through the proliferation of slogans and buzzwords in the church, the likes of which we've never seen before. For example, the renewal of Vatican II. But there hasn't been a renewal. There's been a collapse in the adherence of the faithful to the basic teachings of the church. There's been what Cardinal Ratzinger called a collapse of the liturgy itself. And there is, according to John Paul II, speaking not long before his death, nothing less than silent apostasy in the once Christian West. So the idea of a renewal is double talk. There is no renewal. There's a collapse. And then the idea that with the Second Vatican Council, the church somehow made her teaching more comprehensible, more accessible to modern man. But when, in the history of the church, has the church's teaching on fundamental moral questions been less understood, less accepted, or more widely rejected than it has been in the past 50 years? Never, I would say. This is why John Paul II refers to silent apostasy in the church in his speech on the state of the church in Europe. Now, this reign of double talk of which I speak has, like so many other indications of the crisis in the church, reached a new level of alarm during the current pontificate. For example, there was a recent letter that Pope Francis sent to Cardinal Aurelio Poli, who is the head of the Catholic University of Argentina, in which he says, and I quote, "The theology that developed," meaning the theology that has developed in the church, "is therefore rooted and based on revelation, on tradition, but also accompanies the cultural and social processes, in particular the difficult transitions." With all due respect, that's a bit of double talk. Because to say on the one hand that the theology of the church is rooted in revelation and is transmitted by way of tradition, but that it also accompanies cultural and social processes, is to suggest at one and the same time that the church's teaching doesn't change with time, but that it does change with time. And this is what we're seeing with the synodal process. We're seeing this idea that now there's this gap between church teaching and the so-called reality of the way people live their lives, and therefore the church must adjust her teaching to the reality of daily existence. But that's simply the relativization of church teaching. But church teaching, if it is in fact rooted in revelation itself and tradition, cannot change according to the state of faith in people in general, because that would mean that the church has become effectively a democracy in which the practice of morality is determined by consensus. Now, another alarming indication of this tendency to relativize the faith while paying lip service to the Church's tradition is seen in the secretary of Pope Francis's so-called Gang of Eight. This is the Council of Cardinals that advises the Pope on church affairs. And in itself, this is a disturbing development. The idea that the Pope would have some kind of commission to advise him as if he were, say, the President of the United States and needed a cabinet to govern the Church. Now, Cardinal Maradiaga, or I should say Cardinal Oscar Rodriguez Maradiaga, is not exactly a wise choice for sound governance of the Church. He recently told the Los Angeles Religious Education Conference, and given what's going on in Los Angeles, I would say that the phrase Los Angeles Religion Education Conference is an oxymoron. He told this conference that, quote, mission is not proselytism. We are not going to the mission trying to convert other people to say, if you don't convert, you will go to hell. No, this is not mission. And what is mission according to Cardinal Rodriguez Maradiaga? According to him, mission is, and I quote, personal acts of charity and love, end quote. So according to this cardinal, who is the secretary of the Pope's effectively cabinet advisors, is taking the position that the Church no longer seeks to save people from hell by warning them about hell. That the Church is basically a social organization that does social work, personal acts of charity and love. Now, of course, the Church's mission includes the corporal works of mercy, but this is done alongside the proclamation of the gospel in order precisely to save people from the fate of eternal damnation. A mission that never mentions hell is not a mission. And to say that you can have a church engaged in missionary activity that never mentions the threat of hell, that never tries to convert souls to the gospel, to say that that's missionary work, it's double talk. It's utter nonsense. And in this context, the perspective of the message of Fatima allows us to see things very clearly, because we can understand, given the reign of double talk in the Church, why the message of Fatima has fallen into disfavor at the upper levels of the Church's hierarchy, and in particular within the Vatican apparatus, because that message could not be clearer on the subject of the Church's mission. What did Our Lady say at Fatima? You have seen hell, where the souls of poor sinners go. To save them, God wishes to establish in the world devotion to my Immaculate Heart, end quote. And that will be done, of course, through the consecration and conversion of Russia. Not through social work, as important as the corporal works of mercy are, but through the conversion of peoples in order to save them from hell. The fact that something so fundamental to the faith has been lost in this reign of double talk is precisely what Sister Lucia is talking about when she refers to diabolic disorientation in the Church. And that, I suggest to you, is the essence of that part of the third secret of Fatima we have yet to see. For Fatima Perspectives, this is Chris Ferrara.